So I'm going to cheat a little bit here and tell you that this is technically a tournament report for my third Road to Nationals tournament. The second one, which took place at Red Riot Games in Mississauga, Ontario, was basically more of the same. In terms of sequels, my performance was more of like The Last Jedi than Empire Strikes Back. That is to say, it had its merits, and it certainly did some work to advance my story arc, but there were some tragic moments along that ride that really left me scratching my head and wondering how the hell it got to this point. Like this. What the living hell is this? So I'm going to skip over my second RTN and merely leave you with the cold, hard results. It was another 2 and 3 finish, but with a much tighter deck. So this RTN report was at Gamers Lair in Barrie, Ontario. It is definitely a little bit of a drive for me, at least an hour in a straight line from the banks of Lake Ontario. And after the previous day's adventure with a brand new list, I had a long time to really sort out my thoughts on the drive up. I had all the familiar fantasies scroll through my mind like the intro of a Star Wars movie, setting the scene for the operatic heroics I looked to pull off. Now, the question in this case was this movie going to end with my hand cut off, or would I be jamming sick beats with the Ewoks on Endor? Now, I needed to attain my own Zen state, so I slammed my favorite Incubus CD in the deck and cranked that bitch to 11. Now, if that sounds badass, keep in mind that I drive a 2006 Corolla. So with that depreciation in mind, that 11 is more like a 4 in today's numbers. Game 1 was Chain, and one aspect of tossing myself into the tournament scene is that I forgot how wholesome it can be to have someone recognize you from a previous event or encounter and relay some positive vibes your way. Over the course of a few weeks with several smaller events, I've come to familiarize myself with the local Flesh and Bud community, and my first matchup was against just such a person. This person, in fact, had crushed me in a Blitz event just the night before. So there was a few seeds planted as I sat down to start my first match. Those seeds were both doubt and motivation. The question is, which would sprout first? So my opponent was incredibly jovial and immensely encouraging to me. He was also the top XP earner in all of Canada. The perfect disguise for the treachery once he revealed Chain was his homeboy here. I guess the first seeds to sprout would be those of Agony instead. I went second and began my onslaught. If I was going to beat Chain, it'd have to be before turn 6. I needed some serious giddy up here and was drawing fairly consistently. I decided early on that I'd only seriously worry about blocking if my hand was pure organic garbage or if I was at 15 or so health. So it's going to be like a bronze lobby in Apex Legends. I was just going to stand still and keep firing until one person falls. My plan against Chain is typically to convert on Crane Dance into Find Center to achieve Zen State when they're on their Banish 4 turn. The cushion Zen State provides soaks up all the arcane buckshot and softens the blow from every other hit. Should they choose to hang on to those cards and wait out Zen State, then they're likely going to swallow a lot of blood debt damage. It was a strategy I like to use that allows me to keep the pedal down and keep firing face. I hit Zen State on time and had it online as a pin cushion. It just so happens that their banishments on my Zen turns were quite horrid. Art of War, Plunder Run, and Enlightened Strikes were burned off the top. Frankly, I was happy either way, was still able to go guns blazing every time I got my turn back. I drew a worthy hand and went to work. I converted on Surging Strike into Whelming Gustwave, taking the drain all the way to Lord of Wind Station, ultimately hitting on a Razor Reflex to keep it going and keep the car on the rails for a few more slaps. His hand was depleted, clinging to 2 health and a pocket of blood debt. Chain's game of letting it ride finally caught up with him, and I took my revenge on one of the happiest people in Flesh and Blood. I swear I am not the villain here. The result? Katsu 10, Chain 0, record 1-0. Game 2 was against Bolton, and once again I was paired off against someone who I had met previously and had a great experience with. A player who had helped me out completing decks and just created a great welcoming feeling when I drove into the local Flesh and Blood culture. Revealing Bolton evoked some mixed emotions from me. I was already planning the victory pose with my winning playmat and tunic after that opening win against Chain, so seeing Bolton was refreshing. I had my very first go at Bolton a week ago at a draft event wherein I got to play the smug-looking bastard rather successfully. At least I understood the mechanic and what he was looking to accomplish. Charge him up and swing like crazy with some nasty axes. Except there were no axes. There were sabers. Now, I know my way around a saber, but these were new to me, and I eventually found out why. The game was rather pedestrian, with many of my attacks getting stifled, and the return coming back relatively toothless. He was continuing to charge his guy and load up one hell of a magazine in his soul. I genuinely wasn't sure what was going on, but I figured there was a reckoning on the horizon. I'll admit I panicked. I hastily tried to get Zen State out when the cards arrived and absolutely flubbed a Snapdragon Scalar's trigger on my Crane Dance. My opponent aptly blocked with a sink below, and I was left without any way to hunt for fine center. I wasted a key asset on a lingering fear that I needed the safety net of Zen. Every jab, kick, and punch was parried or blocked by an endless supply of defensive reactions. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't land any haymakers. I was beginning to deflate, and the inevitability of what was to come finally dawned on me. There was going to be a flurry of sabers that hasn't been seen since Mustafar. For the record, I'd never seen a true Bolton combo pop off. I merely presented my initial defense, sat back, and watched it all happen. It was like receiving a thoughts and prayers before witnessing a meteor slam into my house. It was as spectacular to behold as it was deadly. I was slashed to pieces, and I'm a better man for it, honestly. After the match, my opponent walked me through the strategy behind the deck and gave me tips against it. As I mentioned in a previous video, though the goal is to win the big one, I need these kinds of side quests to level up for the final boss. This was a perfect situation for me to come away with the loss, but a new bag of tricks to be wary of. The result? Bolton wins 16-0 for Katsu. The record stands at 1-1. Game 3 was against Bravo, and I have an irrational fear of Bravo, and I think this digs into the irrational distaste for taking any damage at all in this game. Now, I don't know why, but every other game I've played, taking it on the chin is all part of the process. A wise man once told me that 1 health is infinite more percentage higher than 0, so I shouldn't worry about eating it now and then. Still, Bravo has a big hammer, and that mofo hits like a truck. I need to shake this ghost, or I'll never win. The match started with a bang, and right out of the box, I was staring down a dominated big stick attack. I couldn't even throw my hand at the attack to prune out the garbage. I legitimately had to digest an opening salvo of hatred before I could even figure out what pitch color my cards were. That turn had a stifling crush effect, smothering any go-again capabilities. My turn, I was frozen. The specters of past Bravos had materialized to haunt me, laughing at me from the get-go. Try as I might, though, I sincerely do not even remember what my hand was on my first turn. What I do remember is that I pitched blue, swung with 1 Kodachi, pocketed a red plunder run, and passed like a goddamn coward. The second turn wasn't as terrifying, however, as I was able to deflect a mediocre swing to start the counterpunch. Pitch blue, little double Kodachi, drawing in for some armor, and, well, I pitched another red and closed out with a cute turn with a 9-point Command and Conquer. He gave me a card to block, and I obliterated the crippling crush he had planted a turn earlier. I even got to load the arsenal with a Razor Reflex. It was all gas from then on out. My next turn took my opponent for a ride on the Magenchi Express, taking the combo down the line, capitalizing on a Tunic resource, and the pocketed Razor to give my Lord of Wind go again. I went 7 wide, and my opponent dumped his hand to absorb the damage. I was back in the game big time. My follow-up turn, another full Magenchi combo. It was like some beautiful dream, except I wasn't married to Shakira this time. To my opponent's credit, though, I drew incredibly well, managing to pull off awkward turns against my opponent's defense. They eventually were constantly on the back foot, and I believe I heard the utterance of fucking Kodachis at least 12 times. Now, their final breath was hitting me for a crush of the week. Unfortunately for them, I was packing leg tap and opened the center with a blackout kick in the arsenal and a Snapdragon Scalars still waiting to bite. My opponent accepted defeat, and we had some good laughs along the way. Good sport against a deck wherein really the wheels were just spinning fluidly, and I found my stride. The result, Katsu 15, Bravo 0, record 2-1. Game 4 was against Chain again, and well, here he was again, the second coming of my bane, another Chain opponent. This one, like my previous ones I had faced at several other RTNs, had the same backstory. They had literally just borrowed the deck and otherwise were piloting Chain for probably the first or second time. They legitimately were shelving their more tried, tested, and true heroes to hitch a ride aboard this rocket ship destined for the band planet. This opponent was very quiet and soft-spoken, and we had a very unassuming game. They were immaculately polite, a trait left over, I guess, from their recent heel turn to Runeblade. The game played out quite similar to the others. However, I was presented with a tough choice on turn 3. I had the opportunity to fetch Rising Knee Thrust off Katsu after a successful leg tap, or keep my Crane Dance and find center to achieve Zen State. Blundered here, I think, and chose to push damage. I salivated at the thought of ripping off a wide combo that ended in an Enlightened Strike, but it may have been too early. In my mind, I misjudged the importance of Zen, and I ultimately paid for it. The follow-up turns were painful as the arcane damage trickled in and the attacks kept pouring on. Without Zen State to dull the blade, the dagger was just slowly getting driven into my poor ninja heart. I accepted the charges and kept pushing forward, adhered to the strategy of offense first. I caught a break on their turn 6 banishes, being rather unfortunate, finding only 2 blood debts out of the bunch. I decided to preserve my hand as it was fairly threatening. It may not have been lethal threatening, but with a little luck, I may have been able to stave off their upcoming attack, survive by 1, and win on the next turn. I pushed through for a basket full of damage, bringing them to 4 with only 2 cards in hand. I sat with 13 health, wondering if this was enough to buy myself another turn. Memories of that horrific board state from the day before flickered behind my eyes, reminding me that there was no safe haven against Chain with 6 Soul Shackles. My saving grace would be RNG gods, and just how attentively they had been listening to me over 22 years of CCG career, pretty much cursing them in their very essence. My opponent acknowledged the severity of the game state for both of us. He deadpan told me that he needed to kill me now or lose the game. This is the kind of theatrical suspense I live for, except I'm usually on the broadcast side of the drama, describing the tension, not knee-deep in it, clinging to life. 6 banishes, 6 hits. Despite donating my entire hand and wardrobe, I was just overrun by a fleet of attack actions, go-agains, arcane damage, and outright nuttiness. It was a winnable game and another great learning experience. The result here was Chain 4, Katsu 0, record all squared away at 2s. Game 5 was against Dash. I knew I was leveling up when I saw Dash and knew what to expect. I understood there were variations of Dash on the market, but Control was a clutch option to play into the Chain Fiesta that we've been celebrating for months. I had beaten Dash Control a week ago and was better equipped this time to navigate what was likely to be a fairly sluggish game. As we set up our sideboards, my opponent was outwardly debating whether I was Control or aggro. Mutterings around the room before the tournament suggested that nobody was really suspecting aggressive Katsu, given Chain was eating them for breakfast a lot, and previous successes for the hero leaned towards a Control build. When the equipment flipped and I flashed the heart and cross straps, there was an exclamation of, aggro. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I sensed a little disappointment in the voice, perhaps suspecting he teched towards Control Mirror. Either way, this changed nothing for me. I was going face hunting and knew it was going to take some patience. I went first and began the assault, poking here and there, trying to buy out the myriad of 4-block defense reactions that seemed to just always be at the ready. After 3 turns of pushing forward as best as I can, I noticed my opponent was struggling to get the gun show up and running. The previous week's machine gun attack of multiple pistol fire for 4 damage was only limping in for 2 once, maybe twice a turn. Hardly the fearsome barrage I was looking out for. I kept the pace up, sensing that my opponent was struggling to attain any lift here. I found a full Lord of Wind combo off some nifty attack reactions and took advantage of some great Tunic timing to rattle off some very wide attack turns, slamming my opponent for more dangerous amounts of damage. Their counterattack was quite digestible, and I didn't even give it a second thought about blocking, really. I kept my hand healthy and continued to pressure on every turn. They were forced to abandon several turns to mere pistol fire and reload, while I was rushing in full steam every chance I had. The game ended with a series of attacks that eventually went too wide for my opponent to cover, and I scored lethal with an unchallenged Kadachi into Snatch. I asked my opponent if he just fell victim to draw, and he admittedly said that he made some bad choices early in hopes that certain cards would reappear later. Now, I felt that one, as really not just a game prior, I gave up on a Zen State line to push damage, thinking I'd really just draw into Zen State later on and have another shot at it in no time. Before we packed it all away, he walked me through the key points of running Control Dash, and we shared some insights about each other's decks. Confidence now was flying high, and I scored a 3rd win at an RTN, something that has eluded me. Everything beyond this point, honestly, was just extra sprinkles. Result here, Katsu 8, Dash 0, record 3-2. Game 6 against Bolton. This is new territory now, and I can confidently say that I have never played in a 6-match Swiss before. I was already tired from the day, and the drive up really had kind of dug deep into my endurance, but was invigorated by the new peak I'd hit at 3 wins. For some, that's a pitiful total, but as I prefaced in a previous tournament report, this isn't about being the best. It's about improving, and objectively, that is what I have done. Walking into another Bolton match, however, did give me a little bit of anxiety. Before I sat down, another player that I had been playing with at other events had approached me for an update. So he told me that if I went 4-2, I had an outside chance to get into the top 8. So full record scratch, hold the phone, stop the bus. I could make this cut. I carried this lead brick on my conscience from then on out. Now I had the task of beating Combo Bolton, a deck I had just learned existed, and had the added consequence of maybe squandering a shot of getting into a top 8. So here's where the entire journey pays off, right? I said it before, you're not losing if you're learning. After every game, I tried to take something from it. A hint, a clue, maybe some sort of insight into a vulnerability. A line to take, a trap to avoid, whatever. After playing Bolton in round 2 and getting utterly squashed by it, I spent 10 minutes with the player to ask questions about the deck. Here was my chance to get a return on that investment. I'm going to say this with as much poise and as much decorum as I possibly can. This was flat out murder in broad daylight. My opponent struggled to draw any setup cards, and despite charging here and there, I was in utter cruise control. I managed to attain Zen state, not because I needed or wanted to, but rather because I could. I pressed damage over and over and drew fire on every turn. Enlightened Strike, Command and Conquer, Surging Strike, the whole team showed up to play. Before long, we got to that fucking Kodachi's point of the game. Again, my opponent drew duds, and I was dipping into next year's luck to find these kinds of hands. It was never in doubt. A graceful concession after a final combo line led to the revelation that really the deck had seemed to have been betraying him all day long. And I know the feeling, but at this rate, I have to lean on my own play being the driver towards this success. Bad draws will happen, but I felt like I just couldn't lose. The result here, Katsu 34, Bolton 0, result 4-2 record. My mind was buzzing with all kinds of fabricated possibilities that may occur. My 4-2 was the right sequence of numbers to earn a spot in the top 8, as rumors swirled that there was an awful lot of us, and as many as 2 or 3 of us would get in. What surprised me, however, that while waiting to hear about the tiebreakers, a nagging doubt was leading me towards hoping that I wouldn't make it in. Like a carrot on a stick, this doubt kind of wanted me to turn away from the next leg of this journey and just cut my losses. But I wasn't losing. This was new territory for me, and I had to battle my own confidence issues to convince myself that top 8 was a good thing. That losing here was fine. I have never felt this before, and I'm certainly glad I encountered it. When the dust settled, I finished 13th place and left the venue floating on a cloud. There was relief that I didn't have to worry about losing in the quarterfinals, sure, but there was also a renewed confidence that was muscling out any doubt or anxious doom that skulked over me when the games mattered. This was a huge win for me. It felt like unlocking a new part of the map that I felt I was just massively ill-equipped for. I cherish this experience, and I will build on it. You're not losing if you're learning.